We're all sick, tired, and wasted. We're all sick, tired, and wasted. You're not the only one. Welcome to Redacted Tonight VIP. I'm Lee Camp. Today, my guest is someone I view as a bit of a legend. He wrote the New York Times bestseller, Confessions of an Economic Hitman. And it was one of the earliest books to wake me up to the fact that the United States has a colossal economic empire along with its military empire that forces struggling countries to drown in debt, basically a feudal system of nations that is responsible for the death and suffering of millions of people over generations. If other nations refuse to take on our economic peonage that we offer them on a silver platter, then we try to bribe their leaders. Then, if that doesn't work, we threaten their leaders. And if that doesn't work, sometimes those leaders are assassinated. In Confessions of an Economic Hitman, John Perkins revealed his role in that process, a role he is now sickened by today. Nowadays, he works tirelessly to help create a better world, one built on life and peace rather than death and war. Here's my conversation with John Perkins. John, thanks for joining me.
My pleasure to be with you.
I just want to start off by saying it's a real thrill for me because your books were very significant in waking me up, getting me outside the story of the corporate media that they feed us. I imagine you hear that a fair amount from people.
I love hearing that. It's why I write. So I'm glad to hear that from you because you do great shows and have some wonderful people on. It's a privilege to be with you.
Thanks so much. I want to start with the oil and gas companies that are basically as big as ever. You were friends with leaders in countries that tried to stand up to them, nationalize the oil, their black gold in their various countries, and some of those leaders were likely assassinated. That was the 1980s. Do you feel these massive oil and gas multinationals still kind of have the world by the balls?
They do, and it's maybe a little less important now because Wall Street plays such a huge role now. Back in my day, the World Bank and some of the multinational banks played a bigger role. But today we've also got Wall Street coming in. And yet, yes, oil and gas is still very powerful. Well, just think about it. Our Secretary of State comes out of the oil industry, and our former presidents and the Bush family and Condoleezza Rice. I mean, they're constantly in high places, and they control so many resources around the world. So many transportation networks that they're extremely powerful, yes.
Yeah, absolutely. Wall Street as well, and as you mentioned, Rex Tillerson. So it seems like the facade of it, you know, having an oil government is kind of gone now. It's just straightforward CEO of ExxonMobil as Secretary of State. You also mentioned the World Bank there in your answer. Recently, Bolivia's President Evo Morales announced his country's total independence from the World Bank and the IMF. Can you explain why that's such a big deal?
Well, yeah, and you know, I met with Evo Morales and also the former president of Ecuador just left, was in office for about 10 years, Rafael Correa, who has a PhD in economics from the University of Illinois. Understands our system very well. He also did that. He basically got rid of the what he called the U.S.-backed banks, which is the World Bank, the IMF, Wall Street, and these countries are now taking money from China, which I think is unfortunate. But when I talk to them about this, they say, well, we'd much rather be indebted to China than anybody involved with the United States because China's never overthrown our government, never assassinated one of our leaders, never built a military base in Latin America. The United States has done all those things. We know the United States will do this. And I asked, well, don't you think China may do it too? And they say, it's always possible, who knows, but they haven't done it yet, and you have. So, you know, we trust China more. And I really think that's unfortunate that we put ourselves in this position after the Soviet Union collapsed in '91. We had an opportunity in the United States to really promote good business practices around the world. We did the opposite. We promoted exploitation, and that's very unfortunate. And so now the Chinese are stepping in and taking advantage of the mistakes that we made.
Yeah, and just for the people that maybe haven't read your books, we have so much control of the World Bank, and the World Bank and the IMF, they push debt on countries, and then those countries basically have to do what they want. Is that to shorten it to an elevator pitch? Is that how it works?
Yeah, my job was to identify countries with resources that corporations want, like oil, arrange huge loans to that country from the World Bank or the IMF or one of their sister organizations. And the money never went to the country, though. It went to our own corporations, the Bechtels, the Halliburtons, these kinds of companies, to build big infrastructure projects, power plants, highways, industrial parks in those countries, things that made big profits for our corporations and benefited a few wealthy families in the country. But the majority of the people suffered because money was diverted from health, education, and other social services to pay off the debt. And in the end, they couldn't pay off the debt. So we'd go back and say, hey, sell your oil real cheap to our companies without any environmental or social regulations. Let us build a military base on your soil. It was really a very strong form of imperialism, and it was tremendous exploitation of these countries. And some of the wealthy families in the countries benefited, so they supported it. And they usually, held the political positions. And if they didn't support it, as I said earlier, we overthrew those governments, or the CIA or CIA assets, or maybe assassinated their presidents. Two of my clients, President of Ecuador, Jaime Roldos, and head of state of Panama, Omar Torrijos, were both assassinated because they would not go along with these deals. It's a terrible legacy. And
of pushing debt on these countries seemed to work so well that I had hypothesized a few years back that the corporatocracy realized that worked so well, they started using it on Americans. Drown us all in debt, and then we'll work our whole lives to try and get out of it and pretty much remain docile and easily controllable and a productive member of society for the corporatocracy. And you, sure enough, in your extended version of Confessions, said something similar. Is that right?
Absolutely. It's come home to roost, education debt, college debt, university debt, credit card debt, mortgage debt, all these debts have really enslaved Americans. And it's one of the reasons why I think we're so dumbed down and not rising up against what our country's doing in the world today and the threats. I mean, it's outrageous to think that a president of the United States would be sticking a thorn in the side of the head of state of North Korea, a very dangerous country, North Korea, and a very unstable and dangerous leader. And we have a very unstable and dangerous leader, and he's just doing everything he can, it seems like, to aggravate this guy in North Korea. And Americans are talking about it, but we're not doing anything. He hasn't been impeached yet, It's just interesting to me that we're so dumbed down that we just kind of accept what's going on. And in the process, the United States is definitely in decline. China's on the rise. The United States is in decline. I got to say, it's our fault. We've got no one to blame but ourselves.
You don't hear much of this on our corporate media. Can you talk a little about that? Who do you feel what is the goal of our corporate media if they're not talking about these incredibly urgent issues?
They're a propaganda machine for the most part, for the big corporations. It's interesting to me that people talk about what's wrong with capitalism. Well, capitalism, the kind of capitalism we have today, is a failure. It's a bad system. It's what I call predatory capitalism. But capitalism essentially means that the production facilities and the commercial facilities are owned by individuals, by private citizens, not by a government. So the small farmers markets are very capitalistic. Little markets in Latin America are capitalistic. What we have today is something that's turned capitalism on its head. Some people would refer to it as fascism. It's where actually, rather than the governments controlling the means of production and commerce, that those who own the means of production and commerce are private citizens, and they control the government. And so the government of the United States today is very, very much controlled by the big corporations, or the leadership of the big corporations. Corporations are just people, but their leaders have tremendous power, and including over the media. So the media today, the mainstream media, unlike you, and there's quite a few others that are really being heard today. The mainstream media is either owned outright by big corporations, or it's manipulated by big corporations through advertising budgets.
Yeah, absolutely. And some of it has to do with outright propaganda, and some of it just has to do with muddying the waters with nonsense news all day long. I mean, if they fill the airwaves with Trump's tweets endlessly, then you don't have to worry about all that other information we should be getting. I wanted to get to something else here to talk about the aid industrial complex, for lack of a better term. People who support this corporatocracy, our empire, love to brag about how much aid the U.S. gives to other countries, often developing countries. Why is that misleading?
Well, it's unfortunate that all of the aid that we give goes to supporting corporations. It does not go to helping poor people. The fact of the matter is we don't give aid to the countries. We give aid to our own corporations through the countries, for the most part. Now, there are exceptions. You know, after a major hurricane or something, we send a lot of water down and medicine and tents, and that's very good, and that's good aid. But it's a very small part of the overall foreign aid that we give. Most of the foreign aid we give is there to boost us up and to boost up our corporations' presence in those countries, to really enslave those countries in a certain way. Yeah,
there's always plenty of strings attached. So let's get to some solutions here, answers, what people can do in this world that feels to be spiraling towards unlimited corporate control. In the updated versions of Confessions, you list a bunch of steps people can take to create a better world and switch us from, as you call it, a death economy to a life economy. What are the most important of those steps that you feel people can take?
Well, yeah, and again, you know, the book has these lists that are, if you're a student, there's a lot of things you can do. If you're a business person, there's a lot of things you can do. If you're a parent, so there's these lists. But you know, mostly what it is that we're operating under a false premise in the world, a perception, I would say. And that perception really happened in 1976 when Milton Friedman won the Nobel Prize in economics. And one of the most important statements he made was that the only business of business, the goal of business should be to maximize short-term shareholder profits regardless of the long-term or social and environmental costs. And that changed everything. I'd been in business school shortly before that, and that's not what I was taught. I was taught that you make a decent rate of return for investors, but your corporation should be a good citizen. So this has created, since 1976, this terrible system that's failing us today. The oceans are rising, the glaciers are melting, there's warfare all over the world. We're threatened with nuclear holocaust. We need to change our perception and understand that the goal of business should be to make a better world. Pay investors a decent rate of return and invest that money in things that will clean up pollution, that will regenerate destroyed environments, that will recycle and use other technology so we don't have to dig up the earth anymore. We don't have to have a death economy that kills the very resources upon which it depends. So it's really, and this is a long way of getting to your question, it's telling a new story. It's telling a story that we only want to buy from businesses that are dedicated to making a better world for us and our children and grandchildren, to creating a life economy, an economy that itself is a renewable resource. So for everybody out there, your listeners, I would say, you know, whatever you do, keep telling that story. If you're a carpenter, build with sustainable materials whenever possible, and tell your clients why you're doing it. And tell them this may cost a little bit more, but you're investing in your children's future. If you're a writer, as I am, write about these things. If you're a dentist, you get your hands in somebody's mouth, talk about these things. Every one of us can spread the word depending on who we are, what we do. Parents, teachers, plumbers, whatever it is you do. Spread the word that we need to create a new story, which is a life economy, an economic system, a political system, and a social system that creates a world that will continue, and an economic system that is itself a renewable resource. Whatever means you have for telling that story, and also only shop from companies that are dedicated to doing this, and let them know. You know, write letters to Nike and Monsanto and Walmart and Chevron and all the other companies saying, hey, you know, I love your products, but I'm not going to buy them anymore until you pay your workers a fair wage or clean up the pollution you've caused, until you create a life economy. Let Monsanto know you're not going to buy any products that are made with Monsanto seeds until they take the toxic chemicals out of the whole process that they've enslaved farmers with. Get the word out, speak it. And, social networking, consumer campaigns are very easy and fun these days and powerful. Send messages to all your networks and ask them to send messages to all of theirs and so forth.
Absolutely. People need to speak out about these things. Maybe some of what you just said applies to this, but I just wanted you to talk for a minute about your website, dreamchange.org, that you're also the founder of.
It's incredible. It's about teaching compassion and love to businesses. It's all about businesses. It's letting businesses understand that, if they want to be loved, if they want their products loved, if they want people to buy their products and to buy from them, they need to be lovable. And that means creating a world that we will all want to inhabit. And you can go to dreamchange.org to find out more. Also, my personal website, johnperkins.org, where I write about the trips. I'm taking a group of people to the Mayan people of Guatemala in January. We've got a few spaces there. People can go to my website, johnperkins.org, and also dreamchange.org to learn more about what that wonderful nonprofit organization is doing and its Love Summit.
John, thank you so much for all your work, and keep fighting out there.
My pleasure. It's so great to be with you. You do a great show, and please keep spreading your message. It's so important. We got to get that story out there. We got to change the perception, and changing perception changes reality.
We have to go to